Cool. My name's Alex, and I'm a public sector solutions engineer, and I want to do a very quick lightning talk around the Tanzu Application Platform beta 2. So again, beta software here. Let's first talk about what the domain is that the Tanzu Application Platform operates in, and that's around easing developer, operator, and security concerns of delivering applications from first line of code all the way to running in production on Kubernetes. So let's look at each of these layers a little bit deeper and see where that takes us. So if we start with the discover and start layer, the problems that teams really are thinking about there as developers and operators, how can I find the standards and defaults that my organization might want me to build off of? And similarly, what services are out there that I might consume, or what is the architecture that I should be building into? So if we look, Application Accelerators really tackles the first layer in this problem, and that application accelerators are a Kubernetes native way to offer starters, be that pipelines or supply chains as we call them, or application doc templates. I mean, really the sky's the limit here of what you could hook into an accelerator for teams to pick up and get started. So it's a very nice way to codify defaults for your organization. Next, we look at how can I discover what services and data are out there that I might consume or need to integrate with. And this is where API Portal comes in. It's a really great service that we've built around Spring Cloud Gateway, totally open source. And what our service allows introspection into all of those services and APIs that might be available for you to consume and use. So there we go. At the end of that flow, we might have an application that we pulled from our application accelerator supply chain that we can iterate into, and we kind of know what data is out there that we might be able to consume or need services we might need to integrate with. So let's move to the next part of the flow. It's a little bit wider window of iterating and debugging. So when we look at this, we start to think developers are like, hey, I want to actually write code. I want to get going. And the concerns that they might have in this domain are around like, hey, my app works locally, but like, how do I know that it's going to work in Kubernetes? Like those aren't always one-to-one. Frankly, they almost never are. And then like, say I do actually push my application to be that like a staging environment or wherever prod, how will I know if my application is actually running well? How can I see logs, metrics, etc.? So things that we have that operate in this domain as a part of the Tanzu Application Platform. In the iterate space, we really see our integration with developer conventions and Tanzu dev tools for VS Code. You don't have to use this flow, but as an option, you can get a fast feedback loop of actually live debugging on Kubernetes clusters in your own like local dev environment. So this is a very nice convention to allow developers to not have to have entire Kubernetes infrastructures locally. While they could use, for example, Tanzu Community Edition to solve that problem, they don't have to. They could point at running clusters. It all depends on the workflow that works for you. And developer conventions enables this flow. If we look at the debug section, we start to see application live view coming in. And application live view is a tool, really it's an app with like surrounding connectors that allows your developers to have their applications effectively like auto wired, to use springy terms, into an app that shows things like metrics, HTTP requests, memory consumption. It's not a full observability tool like Tanzu Observability, but it does get you a decent amount of the way there. So let's keep going because we're running out of time fast. So next in the flow, we have test and build, scan, sign, and store and deploy. And this is all about like, hey, how do I get like my code built into a container, assuming my test passed? Security starts to hop in and be like, hey, I don't want you just deploying anything. What are you doing over there? And then lastly, like, how is my application actually going to be deployed? And the backbone to all of this is our supply chain choreographer. And supply chain choreographer is built on top of open source cartographer, and it's a tool that we use to construct Kubernetes native supply chains. The beauty of these supply chains is that you can integrate with any tooling that you want that builds the connection back into supply chain choreographer. And it does, as the name states, it choreographs a flow to wherever the end of that supply chain is. For example, we actually ship with 2 default supply chains that you could get started with today and start running in your environments, to be that just like build an application using Tanzu Build Service and deploying, or doing some testing. And you can build your own. You can build your own custom supply chains, and again, push them back to app accelerators or wherever feels right for your ops teams to iterate on, or And developers just specify, hey, like this is where I'm at, this is what I'm going to do, and let's rock and roll. So let's look at the pieces of what's in a supply chain, because there's quite a bit there. The first part being a source controller, which helps pull code from Git. Next could be, again, literally anything. We could say, hey, I want to do some custom whatever that integrates with the supply chain choreographer methodology. Great, go for it. Then we could use our tried and true Tanzu build service built on top of cloud native build packs, which allows for easy operational management of base images and language runtimes for developers to not have to be concerned with how does my code become an OCI compliant image. Next, we hop right into convention service, which is quite cool in that it allows operators to specify conventions for certain application architectures to like inject certain things. So this is like, for example, has a nice integration with application live view for Spring Boot apps. And that if like from the Tanzu build service, the convention service sees that, hey, that was a Spring Boot app that was built inside of the build service, it's able to automatically do all of the Kubernetes configuration to hook up your Spring Boot app to application live view, which absent that would be a ton of code and work for a development team to wire up. And as an operator, you don't want that sprawl in your environment. Next, we look at a really big and really important section, which is the supply chain security tools, where we do things like scanning, signing, and storing. In the scan section, it's kind of what you would imagine. It runs scans and has policies to allow to say, hey, like I found criticals in my underlying image, like don't deploy. When we move to the sign phase, this is where we start to really get to the heart of some of the more hard and challenging parts of the secure supply chain, in my opinion, around if I sign my code throughout the iterations, like how can I know that changes weren't made? And if a malicious attacker were to come in and change my code, I don't want that to be deployed if my signatures have been corrupted, for example. And lastly, storing. Like once we've actually like said, hey, there's like vulnerabilities, you don't want them just disappearing into the ether. You want to be able to query them or maybe render them for your security teams, whatever feels appropriate for your org. Whew, I don't think we're going fast enough. I'm just kidding. Let's keep going though. We are going quick. And lastly, we end with the actual deployment, which is typically done with our cloud native runtimes, which can simply be summarized as saying really creating a friendly developer abstraction for doing application deployments, turning what can be like a few tens, you pick the number amount of YAML, to just like a single definition file that can be 15, 20 lines long, and handles things like scaling and stuff like that. So we can see here the power of supply chain choreographer and the parts within it that are all under the Tanzu Application Platform umbrella. Pick and choose what works for you, and customize to fit your org's needs. Lastly, we look at what, in my opinion, is one of the coolest parts of this entire Tanzu Application Platform, which is the run section. And like when running, operators are like, hey, I want to provide enterprise services. I've spent all this time hardening, database deployments and et cetera, et cetera. I don't want teams just doing willy-nilly whatever they want. I want to be able to offer standardized like services to my org. So at runtime, they're not trying to do some crazy business. Well, first of all, we have to understand that we've built everything here on the service bindings for Kate's open source project that we help manage, which is built on the service binding spec. And it just allows for this notion of simply connecting to simply and in a standardized way, connecting to services. It can get complicated quick, but really can think about this as a simple way to connect to applications and in a standard way. So operators don't have to worry about what kind of crazy process teams are using to share secrets and make connections. And then on top of that, we see the really cool services toolkit, which allows for operators to have that standardized experience of creating like services, be that on a cluster with other application teams or off cluster or on other clouds. It doesn't really matter so far as they can talk to each other somehow. And it creates that experience for developers to just say, hey, I want to use RabbitMQ7 over there. And that's it. Like RA can be picked up. Same thing for P1. You just pick up those and connect to those services using the services toolkit versus having to do, a bunch of bespoke configuration or just spinning up your own services locally. So enterprise scale there. And frankly, that is it. We doubled the time of our desired lightning talk, but I think we got to where we wanted to go. So any questions, please don't hesitate to hit me up. Anything you think I might have messed up, also, please don't hesitate to hit me up. And thanks again. Talk soon.